Greetings from Mississippi this week, folks. Well, it was a whirlwind week last week, let me tell you. Heavy duty chores around the house completed before my departure yesterday afternoon. Multiple doctor and dentist visits, a candidate town hall, putting up campaign signs throughout the district. By the way, I'm not done yet. Then I was speaking with voters, both on social media and in person. Then there was putting together this podcast and so much more. There definitely needed to be 2 or 3 of me this past week to make things go a lot smoother. All in all, though, it was a very productive, even with a bum right hand week. Speaking of which, the doctor gave me the go ahead to return to normal activity, meaning no restrictions, with my right hand. Just in time, right? As I'll be working throughout Mississippi and Louisiana for the next few weeks, I will definitely be needing one hand or both hands for that. We already scheduled the surgery for the next time I am home on my left hand. And since it will be on my dominant hand, I feel that I will be able to get through that much better. I also saw the orthopedic surgeon for the VA. The hand surgeon was through the community care program of the VA, but my VA doctor has ordered an MRI for the left knee. I will see where I can fit that into my schedule because he believes strongly that the MRI will reveal that I need orthoscopic surgery on my meniscus to repair it. I was speaking to one of my neighbors that suffered an injury recently, as well as my mother has undergone some surgery to fix the wrist she shattered earlier this year while helping to clean up at a church event. And together, all three of us have concluded that this getting old thing is definitely not for sissies. The older we get, the harder it is to heal and the more time with doctors we have to schedule. But it sure does beat the alternative, right? So there was a lot going on last week in my personal and campaign life, and some of which we'll get to in a bit later. Our nation also commemorated the 80th anniversary of the invasion at Normandy, or D-Day. That date is also my older brother's wedding anniversary. Go figure, the Army guy picks that day to get married on. I guess it makes it much easier for him to remember. The sad part about this year's commemoration was our republic's representative on the world stage. Yep, the dementia patient was brought out of the White House, flown to France, put up on stage for all the world to see what appears to be him pooping his pants. It was also caught on a hot mic that his team was planning to bail him out of the celebrations later that day. After all, it wouldn't be good to see him sundowning on the world stage so shortly after we all witnessed him pooping or dropping a load in his Depends, right? But as I have said previously, we're not going to focus so much on national politics because we have a state to save. Each of us do. The federal government has become something that would be completely unrecognizable to the founding fathers, and the only remedy is for the states themselves to fix the many issues that plague our nation. Now for the campaign disclaimer. The following content is approved by Larry Linton for TN12, candidate for the GOP nomination for Tennessee House of Representatives, District 12. Larry Linton, Treasurer. Now let's get on with this week's episode of the Liberty Leadership and Lies podcast, where I would detail how the Good Old Boy Network here in Sevier County is really in it for themselves, and most assuredly not the residents of House District 12. So let's take a stand in the arena together again this week, folks, and get on with the show. Welcome to the Liberty Leadership and Lies podcast. On this show, we will discuss the assaults on our liberty by the very institution we the people created to secure our liberty. We will also compare and contrast the actions of people in leadership positions to the servant leadership that is needed to protect our God-given, constitutionally protected rights. Additionally, we will break down the many lies that elected and unelected officials in government and media spin every day in order to secure for themselves positions of power and influence that are antithetical to the system of government our founding fathers created and passed down to us. Your host on this program is Larry Linton, a 30-year veteran of the United States Navy who also runs his own leadership consulting company. He is also a candidate for the Republican Party's nomination to represent Tennessee's House District 12, which includes Gatlinburg, Pigeon Forge, Pittman Center, Weirs Valley, Seymour, and parts of Sevierville, and most of Sevier County. So here is your host, Larry Linton. Well, greeting once again, folks, from Mississippi. It feels like forever since I was last in the field for my consulting work. But I'm going to back up a little bit on my comments about the leader of the free world crapping his pants on the global stage and just how it ties into what needs to be done on the state level. Now, while it is quite possible that he did poop his pants while on stage for the 80th commemoration of the D-Day invasion, there is another explanation that is being floated about in his defense. The defenders of the senile old man are telling us that he was trying to sit down. But get this, he was trying to sit down in an imaginary chair. I have to tell you, I don't know if that explanation is really an improvement over the pooping in his drawers. Losing control of your bowels could be attributed to eating some bad food after a transatlantic airplane ride. It's a physical illness that could possibly affect anybody at any age. However, trying to sit in an imaginary chair after he was briefed, probably multiple times, on every movement he is supposed to make on that stage, that is more troubling in my mind. That is a mental problem. A serious decline in the cognitive abilities of the person in charge of the most powerful nuclear arsenal and armed forces on the planet, all while trying to imprison his political opponent, who quite obviously has not suffered the effects of age like the kid sniffer in chief has. Once again, folks, it is proof positive that the federal, national government is beyond saving, and true patriots around the country need to focus on saving their individual states. I don't believe there's any hope for the blue poop hole states. They too are way beyond repair and need to suffer the demise that socialist governments and nations around the globe have all suffered. If you live in one of those states, my best advice is to get out. Start over in a freedom loving state. That's more beneficial than trying to stick it out there waiting to be saved. Now, for the people that live in states like Florida, Texas, and yes, my beloved Tennessee, we need to work harder to ensure the globalist commies and their establishment Republican Party enablers do not succeed in their effort to turn our liberty loving states into complete poop shows like California, New York, and Michigan, and the many others like them. And believe me, the establishment Republicans, those transpublicans that I regularly refer to on this program and on my website, they are working their hardest to take away our freedom for their own selfish purposes. They don't seek elected office to stand in the gap between government and the people. They get into politics because they are in it for themselves and their good old boy comrades. The establishment Republican motives are only slightly different from the commies who want to control everything versus the establishment who want to enrich themselves and their pals. But the end results are always the same. They are sitting comfortably by while robbing the people not only of their liberty, but of their sweat equity. Now, here's something in Sevier County that we can look to. The government leaders in the city of Pigeon Forge using the government power of eminent domain to destroy a family's financial dream for the benefit of an elected official's family and friends in a recent episode. The family and their supporters will be in Pigeon Forge's City Hall this afternoon. If you can make it there to support them, please do so. We also have another example here in the city of Sevierville, where the local government is granting special concessions to a county elected officials. Concessions that the city has denied other residents of the county. I'll be sharing that on my website. And of course, we all know the way the leadership of the Sevier County GOP and how they're violating the state GOP's bylaws in favor of their establishment candidate. Now, by the way, there is still no answer from the state Republican Party. Apparently, they have only one employee answering the phones in Nashville, and they are really busy with this coming week's big gala. They're so busy to pay attention to something as trivial as following their bylaws. Well, they do pay attention to the bylaws only if it means it will protect their incumbents or preferred candidates. More to come on the establishment candidate in an interesting conversation I had with one of his longtime friends. We'll get into that conversation a bit later in the show. But back to the city of Pigeon Forge and the eminent domain case. I would like to urge the listeners of this show to check out the family struggle on their YouTube channel. The channel is titled Pigeon Forge Eminent Domain. More importantly, as I previously mentioned, show up in force at this afternoon's public meeting at the City Hall. I think the deed is done there in Pigeon Forge, but their actions should wake up every resident of this county to the corruption of our government in this small part of the state. Here in Sevier County, if you don't have the correct last name or aren't connected to those with the correct last name, you will be bludgeoned by that good old boy network. They will bend or even break the rules they force us to live by so they can maintain their position at the top of the power structure. As I mentioned, their political methods are a bit different than the commies, but the end result is the same. They are on top, while us regular folk are left at the bottom to work and pay taxes to support them. And they will continue maintaining their position at the top of the power structure until the voters exercise their ultimate authority at the polls and vote them out. At the very least, start running candidates against the incumbents. We all need to start paying attention to what those in power are doing to us and not for us. That reminds me of several discussions I've had recently about term limits. There are a lot of voters out there that are for legislation that would impose term limits, along with others that don't have a position either way. Now, the people in those two camps, they far outnumber the people that believe, like I do, that legislation is not required to impose term limits. Now, there is an even smaller part of that last category that don't believe in term limit legislation for the same reason that I do. I've stated on this program and in public forums why I believe that way. And I think it is important to clarify exactly why once again. But let's take the opposing side's position first. An individual commented on one of my social media posts with this statement, quote, "Lawmakers won't vote term limits in because it affects their pockets. You say government shouldn't do the job of the people, but they continue to pass laws that hurt the people while helping themselves. The job of the government is to do the will of the people, and right now the will of the people, the majority want term limits. You say term limits is voters' jobs. Campaign money can overrule the voters, and most would agree with me. I will not vote for any candidate that will not make a campaign promise to impose term limits. Sorry," end quote. The sentiment this individual expressed is the most common one I hear and read. So let's break it down. First, the person says that lawmakers will not vote to impose term limits on themselves because it is not beneficial for them. Well, that's absolutely true. And regardless of if an overwhelming majority of the voters want them or not, lawmakers, once in office, will never work to erode their own power. It's a pipe dream for any voter to demand their representative impose term limits. Sure, every once in a while, some random lawmaker will introduce a piece of legislation at the state or national level that would impose term limits, but the individual that introduced that bill does so knowing it will go absolutely nowhere. The incumbent state representative for House District 12, Mr. Dale Carr himself, was endorsed by the group US Term Limits for his pledge to support term limits, even though he has served 12 years in the same elected position. Term limits for thee, but not for me. We can also apply that same logic to his hand-picked successor and my main opponent in the GOP primary. He has served 25 years as an elected county commissioner. Did he support term limits before, or is this a new idea? Now, both of them are catering to the people that actually believe a legislative body will pass a law or ordinance that will impose term limits on themselves because they know it will never happen. But they will gladly lie to your face to get your vote. Now, on to the point about campaign money overruling the voters. Do you think the people donating money to campaigns care about the person who they are donating money to? Or do they care about getting some type of leverage with their donation? Leverage is what they are donating to, not the individual. So campaign money does not really care about term limits or not. Lobbyists and corporations will just donate to the next person in the queue that will do their bidding if the candidate accepts their money. Now, too few people understand that when they are screaming for term limits or supporting candidates that have received endorsements from groups such as US term limits, much like my opponent and the previous incumbent has. That is how they keep the electorate placated. Those are just some of the reasons why I don't support legislation calling for term limits. One, because it will never happen. Two, because it is a lie told by these candidates because of reason number one. There are a couple of more reasons why I don't support them. One of which is this: what happens when we, the people, we do get a liberty loving, Constitution following candidate in elected office? I know it's rare, but there are a few examples out there right now, even a couple right here in our Tennessee General Assembly. What happens when those candidates, the ones that have been standing in the gap between the citizens and tyrannical overreach by government, what happens when they become term limited? Are we going to get somebody in the same mold to replace them? Probably not, because we'll get more liars that are supported by corporate and lobbyist money and are not the least bit concerned with the Constitution and following their oath to it. I'll come back after this next break with the main reason why I do not support term limit legislation. So, with that, I'll be back in a bit. So, stick with me after this short break. Okay, folks, we're back with the final full segment. And based on the feedback I've received on the last episode, we're going to stick with the format we kicked off with last week. Only two full segments sandwiched between the opening and closing segments. Brief and to the point, so to speak. Now let's get to the final and biggest reason why I do not support term limit legislation. When people clamor for term limits, do you realize what it is they are actually saying or actually admitting to? First, they are admitting to the apathy of the electorate in general. I addressed this point in a recent town hall I participated in. I'll be sharing the video of that event on my Rumble and YouTube pages as soon as I get done editing it. It is a copy of the video from one of the attendees that shared it on Facebook Live, so it isn't the best audio or visual quality. I just want to share it for a couple of reasons, which I'll get to in a bit. Back to term limits, though. The people that want term limits and yell the loudest in support of it are those that recognize, most of them subconsciously, that enough people do not participate in our system of self-governance. And because of that, we allow these mini tyrants into office and keep them there. Even if those mini tyrants promise or pledge to support legislation and imposing term limits, they're lying to the voters. Also, by asking the government to do something that is the duty of the voters, these people are ceding their authority to the government. And just like the previous case, the government knows that it will never impose something upon itself that limits its power and control. Maybe, just maybe, if everybody understood that we could impose our own term limits on people in elected office through the method designed to impose those term limits, that's our power to vote. When less than 12 or 15% of the voters actually head to the poll in off-year elections, they are ceding their authority over elected officials to the machine that thrives on voter apathy. In summary, term limits are the responsibility of the voters. Almost every candidate that takes a pledge to support term limits is lying to you. Term limits can also have the detrimental effect of getting rid of actual constitutional candidates that are standing in the gap between citizens and the tyrannical overreach of local, state, and central government action. I really do hope the people that have messaged me on social media, as well as commented on my post, can see the understanding behind my non-support of ceding the government more of what is supposed to be mine and every other legal citizen's power to determine who does and does not represent me in elected office. As for myself, I do not think it will take more than 2 terms in office to do what it is that I would hope to accomplish for the voters of House District 12. I also don't think my lovely bride would like to see me serve more than 2 terms. But there is this to consider, folks. At least I'm honest and upfront about my positions. I'm very public and willing to answer any questions the voters may have. The voters may or may not like the answers I give or the positions I take, but I will always be honest, upfront, and public about them. Unlike one of the opponents in the House District 12 GOP primary, as I mentioned in last week's show, I took part in a candidate town hall hosted by Empowered Severe, where myself and one of the 2 other GOP candidates for House District 12 participated, along with one of the 2 GOP candidates for Senate District 8. I also mentioned that there was a straw poll taken at the conclusion of that event where I received 96% of the vote. Not soon after sharing that information on social media, one of the longtime friends of my main opponent, who shall remain nameless out of respect, started a back and forth with me about straw polls on one of my social media posts. After some significant public back and forth on that post, this individual reached out to me privately and we arranged to meet and have some coffee while I was out and about in the county. It was a good conversation. I really want to thank my opponent's friend for taking the time to really hear my position and my thoughts. It was very amicable, folks. This individual is in a profession that I hold very near and dear, and I do not begrudge him his support for a friend. I hope he is listening or watching this week. In fact, this individual told me that he would have probably supported my candidacy if it weren't for his friend running. There were many things discussed that day, and one of which I don't find surprising, but I do believe that the voters here in House District 12 should be made aware of. And as I mentioned, my main opponent did not participate in the Empowered Severe. Now, keep in mind, folks, that Empowered Severe is a county-wide grassroots conservative organization that seeks to keep the conservative voters in Sevier County informed not only about candidates, but about other issues at the state level that impact the voters here in Sevier County. Like I said, my main opponent did not show up to that event, nor did he show up to last week's House District 12 candidate town hall event hosted by the Convention of States organization. Now, just why would a candidate seeking the support of voters in the county that are represented by groups such as Convention of States and Empowered Severe, why would that candidate not show up to events where the voters could hear from them? We all know the why, don't we, ladies and gentlemen? Well, I somewhat confirmed that why in the conversation I had with his longtime friend. You see, he has been advised not to show up because he and the groups backing him, hint, hint, the Sevier County GOP leadership, don't want him to be forced to answer any gotcha questions. Go back and watch the video I posted from the Empowered Severe event, as well as when I share the Convention of States town hall, and ask yourself if there were any gotcha questions that were asked. The discerning voters know why he won't show up is because he is afraid to take a firm stance on any issue prior to the election. He wants to get elected based upon his social media platitudes and generalities. He is counting on the apathy of the electorate. I also know that because he will not answer direct questions on his social media posts, nor will he answer questions emailed to him. He responds by asking, either through the post or the email, by asking the voter to call him. He does not want anything on record that voters could potentially hold him to. That, ladies and gentlemen, is one of the clearest indications possible that this particular candidate is in it for themselves and not in this arena to represent the voters of House District 12. After serving more than 2 decades on the county commission, where the only improvements to our county are coming to those people with the correct names or to the people connected to the people with the correct names, that is what we will get if he is sent to Nashville to represent this district. He will be just another tool for trans publicans that are running our state right now. Choice lanes and casinos here in Sevier County will be the result. The taxpayers in this district will continue to foot the bill for stadiums and corporations across the state. Sounds wonderful, doesn't it? He will continue to pay lip service to term limits because he knows that is a lie that will help get him elected and keep him in that seat. If you doubt me on this, go ahead and send him an email requesting his position on any topic. Ask him for specifics on his position and exactly what he will do if elected. Ask for him to put it in writing. Better yet, ask him to publicly debate the other two candidates running for the GOP nomination. You can also ask the Sevier County GOP to host a public debate with the three GOP candidates. You all know what that answer will be, and I hope that it guides you to vote the proper way, which is for one of the two candidates that are not afraid to tell you where we stand. Now, following a short break, we will close out this week's show with wisdom from God's word and my closing thoughts. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back for the conclusion. Once again, folks, as I close out this week's program, I want to thank you all from the bottom of my heart for tuning in and listening or watching the show. Before I close with my thoughts, though, I want to share this week's bit of wisdom from God's word. This week, it comes to us from the book of Ephesians, chapter 4, verse 25. So stop telling lies. Let us tell our neighbors the truth, for we are all parts of the same body. You know, I like how this week's wisdom ties neatly in with what has been happening with my campaign, but I also like it because it was not that long ago that I actually walked along the streets of the ancient city of Ephesus. Now, how does it apply to my campaign, though? Some of you might be asking. Well, the voters, or more correctly, the citizens of not only Sevier County, but our state and nation as a whole, have been telling themselves and their neighbors lies for so long now that when they hear the truth, it seems more offensive than the lies they have been living with. Candidates will tell you lies only to get your vote. I will tell you the truth, whether it earns me your vote or not. Sometimes you might not like it, but it will always be the truth. I would like to issue a challenge to the one GOP primary opponent that has campaigned like Joe Biden since the beginning of this year, from his basement or only surrounded by his supporters. I challenge him to a public debate anytime the week prior to early voting starting here in Tennessee. He can name the place and the time that week, but I would also like to see him come out in public and talk to the voters along with the two other candidates. Come out and answer the hard questions and quit imitating Joe Biden. Be a man and not a coward hiding behind the skirts of the people with the correct names or behind the cheating leadership of the Sevier County GOP. Will you be a man? Or will you just be another lying politician who decided to run for office only because you are in it for yourself? Let's see if he answers the challenge, folks. You know where I fall on that, don't you? He won't tell his neighbors the truth of who he is or what he represents. As I close, I would like to once again ask the voters here in House District 12 to take a stand in the arena with me this election. Until next week, Reveille, it's time to wake up.